On April 5th, 1943, 3 Brazilian fishermen spotted something unusual on the horizon about 9 miles from shore. Turning their boat to investigate, they were astonished to discover an emaciated Chinese man in a rickety wooden raft, dancing, singing, and waving a tattered shirt over his head. Despite being horribly sunburnt and ravenously hungry, the man was in remarkably good spirits. It wasn't until a few days later, with the help of a translator, that they learned that the man's name was Poon and that he had been lost at sea for 133 days. This is his insane story. Poon Lim was born on March 8, 1918, on Hainan Island off China's south-central coast. Despite the First World War being in full swing and a global flu pandemic ravaging the world's population, Lim's family lived a relatively peaceful life fishing in the Beibu Gulf north of the island. Unfortunately, by the late 1920s, a Japanese invasion of China was seeming more and more likely, and the family's future was anything but certain. Lim's father feared that his sons might get drafted into the army to fight the foreign invaders and was convinced that conscription would mean certain death for them. This prompted him to move his family to Malaysia, where they quickly settled in once again, sustaining themselves by fishing. However, as Lim grew up, he wasn't satisfied by this lifestyle. To him, it was boring and unfulfilling, and so when he was old enough, he became determined to do his part to fight Japanese imperialism. He would eventually leave his family and this peaceful life to volunteer to serve as a cabin boy in Great Britain's merchant navy. Life at sea was Lim's first real taste of freedom, but unfortunately, this turned out to be far from what he expected. He and the individuals of Asian descent he served alongside were generally relegated to the worst jobs with the lowest pay, and they were subject to constant harassment and discrimination from English officers and sailors. By 1937, Lim had run out of patience and moved on to find better opportunities elsewhere. He spent a few years working as a mechanic in Hong Kong, but then with yet another Japanese invasion on the horizon, he was once again drawn to the sea in late 1941. In a few short years, he'd already managed to avoid several Japanese onslaughts, but despite his luck so far, his fate was already set in motion when he became a steward aboard the 420-foot, 5,400-ton armed freighter known as the Ben Lomond in early 1942. This ship was a transport ship that regularly brought supplies to Allied forces around the world during the Second World War. On November 23, 1942, the vessel was on the last leg of a 2-week journey between Cape Town, South Africa and Suriname, and from there it was scheduled to make the 1,500-mile trip north to New York City. Even though the Ben Lomond was armed, the ship's defenses were limited to relatively small caliber weapons, and everyone on board knew that they didn't stand much of a chance in a direct encounter with a hostile warship or submarine. The Ben Lomond was also painfully slow, but to top it off, that day, its ballast tanks were filled with thousands of gallons of seawater to balance it out in the rough seas. Worse yet, the vessel was traveling by